I mean, it's called Minority Policy, Rethinking Governance When Parliament Matters, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it kind of ticks a lot of jargony boxes that you need to do for publishers and academics and, you know, ERA and all those sorts of things. It's not a book about the Abbott government or the Gillard government or the Howard government. It's about minority government, and it's about trying to understand in more clear and thoughtful ways what's actually going on in your parliament up on the hill. A lot of what we hear is that, our democracy's going to hell in a handbasket, and it's chaos and it's dysfunction, and we're not entirely persuaded by that, and having seen things up close, we think there's actually a lot more to it than some of the popular perceptions that you're presented with. So in the book we explore minority government, and we try and take a conceptual and rigorous way, but we also try and write about it in a way that's accessible to everyone in an everyday language. So when we got our first feedback from the publisher, they said, "Wow, this is very readable for an academic book. It's almost conversational." I went, "Oh, well, that's actually quite good. And we can't tell which bits are Richard and which bits are you." I go, "Well, it's 3 ticks." So that was really, really encouraging. But it got me thinking about how did we produce a book like that? Because actually, if any of you have written together, it's not easy to write. No, do you do a chapter? Do I do a chapter? And which bits do you do? And how do we get it to flow? And so managing it. So I was thinking, how did that really come together so easily, really? And it has to do with the way we first met. Now, I was working for Nick Xenophon as his. Well, I would have been chief of staff if we had enough staff.
You're just the chief.
I didn't do anything, of course. You know how it works in politics. The politician does everything and the advisor does nothing. We just sit around and, I don't know, go to Aussies and stuff like that. But a good friend of ours, actually I'd say a mentor of both of ours, Barbara Pocock, who's one of the board members of the Australian Institute, who we both have immense respect for. I knew her from my previous time working for the Australian Democrats, and she was saying to me, "Oh, you really need to have a chat to this Richard Dennis bloke." And I go, "Oh yeah," and she said, "Oh no, he gets kind of balance of power stuff, and he gets the demands and the intensity of balance of power and what it takes to work in those contexts with a parliamentarian." And I'm embarrassed to say this, but I said, "Can I trust him?"
She said no.
No, she said yes, you can, and that is actually a really big thing. You become very conscious of what you say to whom and where it might go and who you can trust, and I've found Barbara's advice to have been spot on. Impeccable is the word that I would use to describe the trust that I've been able to over time with Richard, and it was very useful to me in my time with Nick, which was at the time of the global financial crisis. It was a time when the $42 billion stimulus package was kind of held up in the Senate, and people ringing up saying, "But I wanted my $950 to buy a television. What are you expletive doing?" And we'd say, "Oh, well, I'm never voting for Nick Xenophon again." "Well, have you ever voted for him before?" "No." But having someone that I could trust and could talk to who understood was very valuable for me in my time working with Nick. But the best thing was that continued after my time with Nick. And over the course of several years, it was tweets and mobile phone calls and conversations. And I think that's why our book ended up being like a conversation. It's because we've been talking about it and thinking about it and puzzling through this minority government and not accepting some of the stereotypes that are presented for some time. So it sort of flowed into print. Before I get the microphone, I might not get it back. Sorry, Rich. Richard has been an absolute joy to work with. All of you will be aware of his intelligence and his creativity and his ability to translate ideas into accessible forms. But some of you might ask, what's he like to work with? And it's actually really good. I found him to be really generous with his time and his energy, really constructive in his feedback, and very humble. And being an academic and being used to working with people that as soon as you put an idea up, their job is to shoot it down, it's been absolutely refreshing to work with someone who has that energetic and positive approach. And I think that's a really important component of the book as well. But the other story that I wanted to talk about was when I finished up my last day with Nick. One of the senior advisors in Wayne Swan's office while he was still treasurer said, "Well, come over and have a chat and we'll reminisce," and that sort of thing. And I said, yeah, okay. So, and you do build bonds across parties, particularly working for an independent or a crossbench party. You're not locked into your tribes in the same way, and so you get to build those relationships. So I learned very quickly. It took me about 6 weeks to work out that in Parliament saying, well, I'm a social scientist and I'm an academic, that wasn't actually very helpful. It took me about 6 weeks to stop telling people that because it was making my job harder. So I said, yeah, I work for Xenophon. Oh, yeah, great. But this particular person knew that I was an academic, and he knew that I was going back to academia, and he said to me, Brenton, if you're going back to academia, for God's sake, make sure they do something useful. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's not that we don't like theory, and it's not that we're not interested in research, but it just doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing here on the Hill. And in the context of minority government, it's not giving us anything to help. So can you try and do something, conceptually in your writing, your research that can translate back, bridge some of the gap. So for me, that was one of the driving forces behind the book, that challenge, and also the ongoing conversation with Richard, which was a really energising thing that probably got us over the hurdle where most people think about writing books, and we actually got it done.